So, welcome to session 2 of Introduction to Comparative Politics. Session 2 is titled New Global Developments in Comparative Politics. In this session, students will learn about some of the new global developments that took place beginning in the 1980s that shook the very foundations of comparative politics. These developments resulted in a shaking up of some of the long-standing ideas that had taken hold in comparative politics for many years. Students will also be introduced to one of the guiding approaches used by many comparativists in their work: the focus on or use of political institutions as a guide in the business of research into political phenomena. This session will also share the importance of political systems' attempt to reconcile the equally necessary goals and values of politics, the goals of individual freedom and collective equality. This is at the core of politics and comparative politics. Now, the key topics to be covered in this session are as follows: new global developments since the 1980s, political institutions, a guiding approach, and thirdly, reconciling freedom and equality, a guiding idea. And your reading list is your major textbook. You consult that. So let's move on to the first topic: new global developments since the 1980s in comparative politics. The first new global development was this rapid industrialization in Asia, which took place in the 1980s, particularly in Taiwan, South Korea, Singapore, and China. This generated huge economic growth. Some comparativists asked, was it culture, specific trade strategies, or non-democratic governments that could ignore public opinion and sacrifices for the greater good? Comparative politics scholars sought to explain this change in Asia, which had challenged prior views that poorer countries could not progress because of United States and European domination. A second global development was the collapse of communism in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. This took so many people, scholars and citizens alike, by surprise. For example, in 1989, Eastern Europe rejected communist rule, starting from Romania, Poland, and then the Czech Republic, and others. In 1991, Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev's reforms, called Glasnost and Perestroika, ironically led to the breakup of the Soviet Union. Now, Glasnost and Perestroika just meant political opening and economic restructuring. So opening up the political system in the Soviet Union for people to, for the voices of people to be heard and participate more, and then economic structuring, moving away slowly from the strict communist economic system. Unfortunately, this led to the breakup of the Soviet Union, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on where you stand, because people had begun to taste some freedom. Comparativists, unfortunately, did not foresee this impact of the political and economic reforms begun by Gorbachev. The third wave of democracy was another global development, beginning in the 1970s, the 1980s, and 1990s. Many countries in Asia, Latin America, Europe, and Africa shook off authoritarian rule. Comparativists, again, were interested in finding out the roots of this relatively rapid and unexpected democratization. They were therefore forced to rethink the very future of politics and the role of the comparative politics field in political science. Here are some questions to consider. Where is comparative politics now? O'Neill argues that the aftermath of the unexpected third wave of democratization is where comparative politics is now. It has had to grapple with the fact that long-standing authoritarian governments in Latin America and Africa, for example, have fallen, and these countries have embarked on democratization projects. Huntington, for example, has argued that in the absence of major ideological distinctions between countries, political divisions will fall primarily along cultural, ethnic, and religious lines. We are still looking forward to finding out whether these things will be true. I must remind you or alert you that Huntington is also the scholar who talked about the third wave of democracy in his work in 1991. Note that one major development occurred, we must remember, in 2011, what has been termed the Arab Spring, beginning in Tunisia and running through Egypt and Libya. This has also questioned the views of some scholars that Islamic countries are almost locked into repressive and authoritarian regimes, some of which would be difficult to overcome because of their religious and cultural underpinnings. This latest development is very important as it questions the view that some cultures and regions of the world are more prone to and likely to demand democracy than other cultures, and highlights the fact that indeed, as Amartya Sen has argued, democracy may yet be a universal value. This simply means that democracy may not be the preserve of just the Western countries as we have in Europe or the United States, and that really it could be a universal type of political system that many people all over the world would want. Topic 2, political institutions, a guiding approach. In comparative politics, political institutions is one of the major ways in which to study comparative politics. So we must define political institutions so that you have a better idea. We simply define these political institutions as organizations or patterns of activity that are self-perpetuating and valued for their own sake. In other words, they are usually difficult to change. Once you have the institutions, it is difficult to change them, even though they can be changed. So they embody norms or values, secondly, that are considered central to people's lives and cannot be easily dislodged or changed, as mentioned. Thirdly, they can affect the behavior of individuals and political leaders and can in turn be affected by them. In other words, institutions can be both a cause and effect. So they can affect the behavior of individuals and cause something to happen, and in turn they can be affected by them, and so then institutions then become the effect of the behavior of individuals and leaders. Examples include elections, courts, legislatures, the army, etc. Political institutions, it has been argued, are a useful way to approach the study of politics and comparative politics because, as O'Neill puts it, they set the stage for political behavior by influencing how politics is conducted. Political institutions are critical because they are constructed as patterns that can influence individual political behavior and be influenced by the behavior and decisions or choices of politicians and other political players. Thus, institutions are not merely the result of politics, but can also be an important cause. O'Neill argues, the author in our main textbook, argues that the return to the study of institutions in many ways combines the traditional and behavioral approaches. Institutional approaches take their emphasis on cause and effect relationships from behavioralism, or the behavioral approach we discussed earlier, and take their description of institutions and their functions from the traditional approach. Now, in your own words, how would you define political institutions? Give 2 reasons why political institutions are a guiding approach of most comparativists. And then our final topic in session 2, reconciling freedom and equality, a guiding idea. First, we must define freedom and equality. O'Neill argues that people strive for political power in order to be able to achieve some level of individual freedom and collective equality for citizens. The substance of politics is at its core bound up in the struggle between individual freedom and collective equality. So it is hoped that people strive for political power and governments will seek to provide some level of individual freedom and equality for citizens, and not only seek their own self-interests. Freedom is defined as the ability of an individual to act independently, without fear of restriction or punishment by the state or other actors. It includes free speech, free assembly, freedom of religion, and other civil liberties. Equality, on the other hand, is a shared economic standard of individuals within a community, society, or country. Freedom and equality are interrelated and affect political power. Now, freedom and equality as a guiding idea, what do we mean by that? It is important to note that a greater emphasis on individual freedom is associated with a greater decentralization of political power, while a greater focus on collective equality is connected with a greater centralization of political power. The United States, for example, has one of the highest degrees of both personal freedom and economic inequality in the world. Greater personal freedom implies a smaller role for the state and limits on the state's power to redistribute income through welfare and taxes. So, in other words, when there's more of a focus on individual freedom, economic inequality can be a result because the government or the state is not able to really intervene so much to redistribute income. That is what is meant here. On the other hand, too much of a focus on economic equality may erode personal freedom. Demands for greater economic equality may lead to a government's greater control of private property and personal wealth in the guise of redistribution of income. Note, however, that when economic and political powers are concentrated in one place, individual freedom may be threatened. So when a government says that they are going to bring equality, they're going to redistribute income and so on, they may have to take wealth from one person or one group of people and give to another. And in this sense, when they do that, they are restricting the personal freedoms and rights of those people. O'Neill argues that while institutions serve as a map to political activity, the goal of the political activity should be to reconcile the competing values of individual freedom and collective equality. In other words, there seems to always be an opportunity cost in providing one or the other. It is quite difficult to reconcile the two, to try to strike some balance between providing freedom and equality, however, is very, very important, and states and governments should always attempt to do this. We have some questions here that you should attempt to answer. Conclusion of session 2. In this session, you have become familiar with the major global developments that took place in the late 20th century that re-injected new life into the field of comparative politics. We have also looked at the political systems as well as how political institutions can be a guiding approach to the study of comparative politics. In addition, you have been introduced to the competing goals and values of freedom and equality, and why it is quite difficult to promote the two at the same time. One cannot, however, give up. A balance must be sought between promoting freedom and equality. This balance can come in the form of, say, a welfare program, which helps to provide some solace, some help to the poor. The next session will discuss and analyze the important concepts of states, nations, and society. Thank you very much.